My name is Patrice Murphy, owner and trainer of Curves and Gains Fitness. I transitioned to a content creator due to the pandemic. It was a very, very scary time where I had to kind of just pivot due to what was happening. I loved my clients. From the woman that came in that just had the baby to the person that needed to lose weight so they can get off the high blood pressure medicine, like every story I was in. And then when I lost that personal connection, it affected me significantly. I had ended up in urgent care because I was having like heart issues. I mean, I didn't know what to do. Like physically didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to still have that level of engagement without physically seeing people. I was mortified, but grabbed the bull by the horns and started. Did my first class, which turned into me creating a YouTube channel, which now I do my classes on there and I do my classes on Instagram and Facebook. But usually I'm used to people seeing me. I can't see them. Like, what if they're doing the squat wrong? Or what if they, like they can't see my bop? Like, I'm just all in my head. And I finally did it and saw so many people connecting and understanding that my reach was deeper. It was people in North Carolina. It was people in California. It's like, oh, I got up X amount of early to make sure I caught your class. I love your energy and da-da-da. And everything that I was doing in the 4 walls with 20 people was going so much deeper. So for me, it was way more important, and the value on the content became so much more significant because I'm like, these people are depending on me. Like, the value of it was so much more significant than, and not to minimize when I was in front of people, but it became bigger. It became so much bigger. With a background in biology, pre-med, always being in the gym, always being self-aware of where your quads, hamstrings, triceps, biceps are. Those things to me were just common knowledge. I have conversations all the time with my business manager about my content. And I'm like, I don't need to tell people that. They know that. And she's like, no, they don't. So by me being a resource to people with my content, it's brought so much more business to me and allowed me to reach my goals in way shorter of a time than I could have ever anticipated. How I overcame not having an online following, because that was very, very intimidating. I just told myself, even if I just get 5 people, 5 hopefully will become 6. And then hopefully 6 will become 7. And what I just asked a few people to do, like some of my local clients, just give me as much feedback as possible. Because everybody just has 1 or 2 people, even if it's your siblings or your mom or somebody is gonna watch that just give you as much feedback as possible. And it's always gonna be trial and error, as with anything. Even when you do classes in front of people, you're gonna learn something every single time. So it was, okay, this time I have to make sure the music is up. Okay, next time I probably shouldn't be screaming like a maniac. I need to get a headset mic. So I need to do this, or okay, let me get some weights or get a mat for my wood floor so when I sweat, I'm not slipping on my sweat. So as you do things, you just learn stuff and just get over the intimidation factor. And then you also have to be a student of the game. Like, everybody has somebody they look up to. So watch somebody's videos that you admire, see what they're doing. You have to just get over the fear and then just jump into the water. You're not going to start off with 5,000 people watching you. It might be 5, and that's okay.